Please don't shoot the messenger just because you don't like the message. I am not responsible for the conditions that we face as a nation today, but I am not going to sugarcoat what the situation is. My guess is you already know it in your hearts and in the backs of your minds, if not in the front. And if you had any doubt, the last week's election results probably removed them. So I thought it might be useful if we took stock of where we are here on the 10th of November, 2024. And by taking stock, I mean economics above all else. I do that because I think that's a core part of our situation about which Americans are extraordinarily poorly informed. I also do it because it's what I do for a living and it's what I study. And I feel an obligation, morally, ethically, to share with you what is going on, to make sure that however difficult it may be to face it, we will, because that's our best chance to work out of it and to get beyond it, which surely we need to do. Okay, let me get into it then, and I'll try to make it as brief as such a task could possibly be. I do believe we are at a major transition point in the history of the United States and probably of the whole world. I know that sounds grandiose, and I don't normally talk in grandiose terms, but the situation calls for it. And as I say, I'm not going to shrink away from why I think this. So let me begin by telling you why I think it's such an important moment in our history. For most of the last 50 years, roughly since 1970, the dominant economic reality of the global economy and of the United States as the major player and shaper of that global economy in the last 50 years, that period can be characterized by many names, but the one that economists use is the phrase neoliberal globalization. And here's what it means: that in an era that we remember with names like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, we turned away from the legacy of the New Deal. We turned away, as did many other countries, from the notion that a catastrophe like the Great Depression of the 1930s required that government play a major role in keeping capitalism tolerable for the mass of people. Remember what we did in the 1930s. We established Social Security that had never existed before in the United States. We established a minimum wage that had never existed before in the United States. We established unemployment insurance that had never existed before in the United States. And the government hired and paid 15 million people who were unemployed, and nothing like that had ever happened in the United States either. The government was called in to do all these things, in the words of one clever thinker, to give capitalism a human face. And it was paid for because it was very expensive, as you can imagine. To give every elderly American a Social Security check every month for the rest of their lives. To give unemployed people a check every week for a year or two. To hire 15 million people. And the money that paid for all of that were heavy taxes placed on corporations and the rich. It's an important reminder for those of you who do not think that here in the United States we can ever tax corporations and the rich. It's an important reminder, of course we can, because we already did. As the remembrance, and footnote, the politician who had the courage to tax corporations and the rich, Franklin Roosevelt, was reelected president 3 consecutive times. He has been and is to this moment the most successful popular president in the history of the United States, starting with George Washington. So not only can you tax corporations and the rich, but when we had a president who was forced from below to do it, he became the most popular politician we've ever had. In the period starting in 1970, as the memory of the New Deal, as it was called, faded, Reagan and Thatcher undertook to roll the New Deal back. It had already begun before that, but it really gathered steam. And the mantra was the reverse of the New Deal. Instead of calling the government in to give capitalism a human face, people stumbled over one another, led by the Republicans, but tragically followed by the Democrats, to roll the government back, to get the government out of the economy, to go back to a capitalism which, if I may be allowed to continue the metaphor, lacks a human face, as the songs we just heard today document. And over the last 50 years, the government not only didn't regulate the way it once did, didn't intervene the way it once did, but it blessed the decision of corporate America to go where the profits were the greatest, which is what capitalism normally does. And where were profits the greatest? Answer: China. Starting in the 1970s, we had a mammoth exodus, and not like the one in the Bible. No, this was an exodus of American corporate leaders. They had graduated from business school where they had been taught, parentheses, I have taught in business schools myself, I know the curriculum. They were taught, if you want to succeed in business, go to where the wages are low and the market is expanding. The place where the wages were low and the market was expanding the most was in the land called the People's Republic of China. And American corporations, British and French and German and Italian and Japanese, they all went to China.